Dr. Salil Bhandari, Associate Professor in Department of Emergency Medicine. Dr. Bhandari lives by the following dictum, which has been attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Tell me and I forget. Teach me, I may remember. Involve me and I will learn. He's been described as a passionate teacher gifted with infectious energy. Among his residents, he's known as the Wizard of Procedures, and he has revolutionized the intubations are performed in emergency rooms at Memorial Hermann TMC and LBJ. To ensure consistent and optimal results in procedures, he has created a checklist, the same style deployed by those in the aviation industry. Dr. Bhandari has won multiple Dean's Teaching Excellence Awards, and his residents have showered him with awards for being the most dedicated educator, outstanding resident educator, and a resident advocate. He's a master communicator with a gift to thrill his audience. He's a sought-after speaker who's given over 90-plus lectures, including 5 invited presentations in the national meetings for the American College of Emergency Physicians. When I talked to him, I was impressed by his deep desire to make his peers and his residents exceptional public speakers, unleashing the remarkable power of storytelling. He's a groundbreaker in free, open access medical education, has a great collection of archive videos, audio recordings, and blog posts, referenced by emergency physicians from over 15 countries. His videos in the core emergency medicine side have been viewed over 300,000 times. Something interesting, he has a unique relation with NASA. He's one of the few clinicians involved in the NASA astronaut training program. And Dr. Bhandari's dream project to have a TEDx megaphone. Dr. Bhandari.
Why is it that so many high-achieving individuals, like so many of us in this room, still struggle with feelings of self-doubt? Maybe there's a part of you that feels you're not good enough. Maybe there's a part of you that sometimes feels you're not as smart as your colleagues. Maybe there's a part of you that feels that you've somehow managed to fake your intelligence to a certain degree, and you're simply hoping that nobody finds out. And there's this small little fear that maybe one day your boss is going to slam open your office door, come into your office, and say, "Aha! Your ruse is over. I knew all along you weren't as smart as you pretended to be. Time to go, pack your bags, chop chop, carry on now." It's these cycle of negative thoughts that are very common, but have also been labeled as imposter syndrome, or more appropriately, imposter phenomenon. If any of what I said resonates with you, you're not alone. And if anything that I said did not resonate with you, please don't speak to me afterwards, because that might raise my imposter syndrome further. But the good news is that if you learn to manage these negative thoughts in your brain, you can prevent them from you reaching your fullest potential. And you won't experience what happened to me and what I suffered with for many, many years. My first feelings of self-doubt, they all were rooted in 3 experiences in my life. There were 3 stories that happened at 3 pivotal junctures in my educational journey. Story number 1. In middle school, I was vying to get to Strake Jesuit College Preparatory, which is a high school here in Houston. It's an elite high school that required an entrance exam to get into. So I go take the exam, and I very clearly remember during the exam that there's a picture of Newton's pendulum, and they had a question. And I knew if you lifted one ball probably came out the other end. But when you had 5 balls, the question was, if you lifted 3 balls, how many would go out the other end? I hadn't taken physics. I was only in middle school. I didn't know. I didn't know the answer to that. And there were many other questions that I just did not know. And I remember feeling defeated. And I came home feeling like I must have failed this exam. I was like, the exam was over. But out of sheer curiosity, I was like, you know what, let me just look up some of the answers. I was just curious. I looked up some stuff about Newton's pendulum and a few other questions that I didn't really know the answers to. 2 days later, we get a phone call. And the phone call's from the school saying, I'm so sorry, but we can't seem to find your exam. You're going to have to come back and retake it. Lo and behold, I show up 2 days later, same exact exam, accidentally having already looked up all the answers of what I wasn't sure of, and I end up getting admission into Strake Jesuit College Preparatory. There's a part of me that obviously knew that it was a fluke, that was like, this was not done under my credit. And that part bothered me, and I felt for a long time that I didn't truly belong there. Fast forward about 8 to 10 years later, I end up going to college in Boston, come back from med school, 4th year of med school. Story number 2. 4th year of medical school, I'm packing ready to go to New York for my away rotation at NYU's emergency medicine department. I'm packing in, my buddy, who lives in the same apartment complex, comes over, and we're just chit-chatting, and he just asked me, he said, hey, you know what I learned in my ophthalmology rotation today? I'm like, oh, no, what? Tell me. And he's like, oh, I learned why you get a cherry red spot in the eye in patients who have an acute retinal artery occlusion. He's like, do you know why that happens? And I know about that fact, but I didn't really understand why he really got that cherry red spot. And I was like, no, tell me why. And he said, well, you get that cherry red spot because when the retina infarcts, it becomes transparent. So what you're actually seeing is the layer behind it, which is a choroid layer, which is full of blood vessels. And I was like, oh, wow, I never realized that. I didn't realize that was the reason for the cherry red spot. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I filed it away, continued packing, flew off to New York City for my emergency medicine away rotation. 2 weeks into the rotation, every morning they have morning report. All the bigwigs in the department come. Everyone's sitting down. Happens to be a case of acute retinal artery occlusion. Somebody in the audience asks a question, hey, why do you get that cherry red spot? The presenter doesn't have an answer. I did not. I knew in my heart, I was like, I know the answer, but this is not a place for a medical student to be saying what the answer was. And so I sat quiet and looked around. Nobody had an answer. And then they said one more time, as if they were truly calling to me, does anybody really know? And in that moment, I just hesitantly raised my hand and I gave the answer. Everybody in the room was clearly impressed. Afterwards, Dr. Louis Goldfrank, who is one of the giants of emergency medicine, was in the room that day and was the chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine at NYU. Comes up to me, grabs my name tab, looks at it, and says, I'll remember that. I end up getting into NYU's emergency medicine residency program. Even though I knew there were a lot of things that I did right, there was still this nagging feeling that it was simply out of sheer luck that my friend told me that fact, that I happened to know it in that moment, and as a result of that, I got admitted into the NYU's emergency medicine program. Fast forward 8 years later, do my residency, do my 4 years as an attending there, and I come down here to Houston because I'm tired of paying super high rent prices in New York City. Come back to Houston, and I apply for a job here at UT Houston. and I'm driving on my way to the interview. As I'm driving, I just flip on an emergency medicine podcast. I was in between jobs, so I was like, let me just keep my knowledge up. Flipped on a podcast. The podcast was about this article, Longitudinal Changes in Emergency Medical Services, Advanced Airway Management. It was an article about pre-hospital airway management and what was the best choice for EMS providers to do for intubating in the pre-hospital setting. And as this podcast was discussing the article, they mentioned the author was Dr. Henry E. Wang of UT Houston. I had looked at who was going to be interviewing me that day, and I knew in just a couple of hours I'd be interviewing with Dr. Henry Wang. I go do my interview, and obviously, naturally mention this. I was casually that, I hear that I know you've done research about EMS, things like that. Obviously, he was very impressed, not only that I knew about his article, but I could speak about it intelligently because I had just listened to a podcast for 15 minutes analyzing that article. I end up getting a job here at UT Houston, and there's a part of me that still felt that I didn't deserve it because these were all incidences of just random chance. Had each of those incidences not happened, each element of my higher education may not have happened. Did I really deserve it, or was it just all happenstance? So for the first few years that I was here at UT Houston, I fell into a very deep cycle of imposter phenomena. Very deep, and I don't think anybody really knew. I often did not collaborate with colleagues when I could have, out of fear that maybe I wasn't good enough to collaborate with them. I didn't speak up in faculty meetings, even though I may have had something to say in my brain. I didn't speak up in our QA conferences about clinical cases when I had something to say about a case, just because I felt like I wasn't good enough. And this cycle repeated and got worse and worse and worse, and it even affected certain personal social interactions that I had with some of my colleagues. And like I said, so much of this was not visible to anyone, probably in my department. But I knew inside I was dealing with serious self-doubt that I knew was affecting so many of my relationships. And with time and with conscious effort, as well as with some guided therapy, over the last few years, I'd say, I've been able to finally break free from this cycle to some degree. And I want to share with you what I've learned during that process. So I sat down with my therapist, and essentially, we went through a 5-step process for me to get through some of these negative cycles. So step 1, essentially, was to normalize it. My therapist told me about all the famous people in this world who probably experienced similar things: astronauts, scientists, artists, writers, all over the world. Even Maya Angelou has been known to say, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, they're going to find out now I've run a game on everyone. Once you're able to normalize it in your brain, that is step 1 of knowing how common these thoughts truly are. Step 2 is we work to identify and to label it. Right? I had to identify what was happening whenever I had a thought in my head. And instead of labeling it this heavy imposter syndrome, right, we changed it to, I'm just having a temporary feeling of self-doubt. It just felt lighter and much more manageable than a syndrome that was with me permanently for the rest of my life. So once we were able to relabel it in my own brain, the hardest work was I had to work to change the narrative in my brain. I told her about those 3 incidences and those 3 stories and what it meant to me. And she asked me a few questions to help me reframe it. So first she said, look at those 3 stories and ask yourself what strengths are demonstrated in that narrative. So I look at those 3 stories, and there is a certain theme that is also there. That is a positive theme. And that is a theme that demonstrates one of my strongest qualities that I'm proud of now, is a deep sense of curiosity for learning. Right? Had I not gone home after the exam and been curious enough to look up those answers that I missed, I would not have known the answers to the second version of that exam a couple of days later. Had I not been curious enough to hear my colleague telling me about the acute retinal artery occlusion instead of just dismissing him because I had a flight to catch, I would not have known that piece of information. Had I not been curious enough to keep my learning active between jobs by firing up a podcast, I also would not have gotten that job. So that was probably one of the key components for me, was reframing that and seeing what were those positive things that were apparent in each of those stories. The second thing that she asked me was, what evidence am I ignoring? In each of those, to get into those admissions for each of those components, there was way more information that they were evaluating than simply that one exam, or simply just that one piece of information in that morning report. They were looking at my essays, they were looking at my grades, they were looking at clinical experience, my interactions with other colleagues. There was so much more that in my brain I ignored and I put to the side and I just didn't pay attention to, but that were just as equally important. And that's what that mountain of information truly was that I just simply ignored. And the third thing she asked is, am I comparing myself to others unfairly? And I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that one of my weaknesses in emergency medicine, I would say, in general, is probably doing a statistical analysis of a journal article. I never took a proper statistics class in college. It's always felt something that's been difficult to me. My strengths have always been in clinical education, procedural education. The statistical part of a journal article has always been a struggle. I work on it, it's a process, and I keep building it, but it's still my weakest point. And every time I would sit and I would hear someone say something about a journal article and they'd pop off data off the top of their head and cite this study or that study in my head, I'm like, oh my God, how do they do that? How do they know that? And then there's a key word every time someone used the word multivariable regression analysis. Imposter syndrome just flooded right in, because in my brain I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. But it's been a journey per se. But those were the things that always caused them to come in place. And I realized, though, that maybe I was comparing myself unfairly. Maybe they had a background in statistics. Maybe they were a researcher. Maybe they've been doing this for a long time. Or maybe they just learned those terms or that article the night before that journal article discussion. Regardless, there were too many maybes in the equation that it didn't make sense for me to compare myself to that other person, because I would never know all the data. So I kept a little saying in my phone, and the saying, I don't know why it didn't show up here, but I have this saying in my phone that others may seem more knowledgeable in certain areas, but everyone, including me, has different strengths and contributes in different ways. And I kept this on my phone as a reminder, always not to compare myself with other people, and reminded myself every time I had a moment of self-doubt. And that's why I realized, instead of comparing myself with other people, the only comparison that's worth doing is comparing yourself to yourself. Where am I now compared to where I was 2-3 years ago? And I bet you, most of you in this room are hitting it out of the park, all right? Because this is truly the only thing that really matters. So after we worked to change the narrative, I had to have a management strategy of what am I going to do every time I get these thoughts that come up. I had to have something. And for me, I wanted something to refer to. I wanted something to look at, to remind me, and I needed that for myself. So I sat down and did an exercise that I sat down and wrote in my phone why I belong and what I contribute to my department. And I made a list of those things off the top of my head that I could think of that I can refer to in those times when I'm feeling that self-doubt. In addition, I wanted a quote to remind myself. And I had that one quote from before that I already showed you about everyone has different strengths. But I also had a quote from Dr. Brené Brown that I absolutely love. For those of you who don't know about Dr. Brown, she is an incredible social psychology researcher that has one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time called The Power of Vulnerability. If you have not seen it, you need to go and see it. And in this TED Talk, she has done research from thousands of subjects all across the world, gathered them all and divided everybody into two groups. There were people that lived life fully, who engaged and felt a sense of belonging to where they worked. And then there were people who struggled with this sense of belonging and this sense of worthiness. And she asked herself, what is the difference between these two groups? And she found that there was one thing that was different between those two groups. The people who had a sense of belonging simply felt they deserved a sense of belonging. They simply felt they were worthy of love and belonging. That is it. If you feel worthy of love and belonging, you will live a life that is full of love and belonging. And so that's why her quote that I love is, "You are imperfect and wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging," is something that I keep on my phone in that same notes document to refer to when I have some of these feelings come up inside of me. And after I had a management strategy, the last thing I needed to do was talk about it. This is actually something I haven't done at all since I've been here, is my very honest answer. There may be one faculty member that I've shared a little bit about, but my very, very honest answer, today's talk here, is my attempt to do just this. It's difficult, but there's a part of me that knew I needed to begin talking about it. When Dr. John asked me to give a talk today about something about a note to our younger self, I knew immediately that this is what I needed to talk about. Because I had struggled with it for so long, and I wanted to help normalize it, not only for myself, but also have discussions with other faculty members to make everyone feel better about how normal these feelings are and what we can do about it. And so, as this talk is entitled Notes to My Younger Self, I thought I'd end by telling if I had a note to my younger self, what I really would write would be something along the following, and even I would write this to all of you and to my students or anyone. At the end of the day, you are not alone in your feelings of self-doubt. You do belong. You being here is not some accident, and your boss is not going to come knocking through your door the next day telling you to pack your bags, time to go. But when you see a faculty member who you put on a pedestal in your brain as above you, don't shy away from them, learn from them, and ask them to collaborate with you on a project. And when you compare yourself to other people, just remember that everybody contributes something different. Everybody has different strengths and is here for different reasons. And you can never make an accurate comparison with yourself and another person. That's why, most importantly, the best measure of your own success is how far you have come, because at the end of the day, that's all that truly matters. So thank you very much for listening, and hope you all were able to get something out of it.